that this is not in any way a target for kratom plain leaf products. And we think that they missed that distinguishing factor. And that's an important one, obviously, because we are in a situation where you have these chemically manipulated kratom compounds that were derivative of the actual natural alkaloid mitragynine, but in fact were completely flipped in terms of the product content, the majority of which was 7-hydroxymitragynine rather than mitragynine. And that is, of course, an important distinction between these products. So currently, it is our understanding that the governor has expressed a willingness to work with the legislature to properly regulate kratom products. And that, of course, is the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and that he is interested in pursuing an Ohio ban on these chemically manipulated 7-hydroxymitragynine or 7-OH products. And so we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of weeks. Our lobbying team is working closely with the governor's office. We're working with the legislature, and we're working with the Board of Pharmacy to make sure that there's clarity about where we're headed in terms of the right public policy to protect consumer access to safely formulated and properly labeled and age-restricted kratom products. That is what we believe in. Now, I know that there's a lot of concern within the community that there are 7-OH manufacturers and advocates who are trying to replicate what happened in 2016. For those of you that don't recall specifically, the DEA published a notice in the Federal Register on August the 31st of 2016, announcing that they were doing emergency scheduling on kratom. Now, that's typically the process that they use in order to allow for time to elapse between the emergency scheduling and for the development of all of the required scientific data that would justify a permanent scheduling. But in an emergency scheduling, there are three factors that are focused on the imminent threat to the American people based on the addiction liability and availability of these products. It was because of the overwhelming science and essentially a disclosure about how the bias of the FDA about kratom, which had been in evidence for more than a decade prior to their proposal for a recommendation for scheduling, which culminated when the Assistant Secretary for HHS, who is the designated official under the Controlled Substances Act, as designated by the Secretary of HHS, to be the decision maker on all recommended scheduling opportunities. And in 2018, when the full 8-factor analysis that would have justified permanent scheduling was submitted to the DEA through HHS, that happened, by the way, with an acting Assistant Secretary for Health prior to the nomination and confirmation of Dr. Joie. When Dr. Joie took a look at the evidence and data presented by the FDA, and I can tell you that Dr. Jack Henningfield and I sat with his staff, and we were very encouraged with their reaction, the quality of the questions, and the significance of their interest in finding out exactly what the science told about kratom and the value and the beneficial reports that have been provided by citizens in their consumption of safely formulated kratom products. And that was pivotal. We walked out of that meeting thinking that we had made real headway. And what we didn't know is how great the decision was by Secretary Joie, where he issued a letter formally withdrawing the scheduling recommendation provided by the FDA, and he did it for a very specific reason. He outlined the reasons why the scheduling of kratom was unjustified, and he characterized the FDA's recommendation as being based on embarrassingly poor evidence and data. Now, the 7-OH people would love to replicate that particular event and the way it played out, but here are the challenges that they face. First, we know that 7-hydroxymitragynine or 7-OH products were not introduced into the marketplace until the latter part of 2023. We know that they failed to meet the statutorily required designation for having a reasonable basis of safety prior to market entry under the conditions of use. That admission was made by their top scientist at a meeting in January of this year, where he acknowledged that there was not sufficient data to formulate that required federal standard, but they were working on it. and that they hope by mid 2025 now, or in as long as 2026, they would be able to develop the scientific profile to do that. That's an important critical factor here because we know that there was a hundreds of years of safe use and decades of safe use in the United States of pure leaf kratom products and extracts that are properly extracted using FDA approved food grade solvents. That is an important criteria because those food grade solvents limit the ability of the extraction solvents used to create a potency of the extracted material, which would upset the balance proportionally of what 7-OH versus mitragynine would be in the product. They were always predominantly mitragynine-driven products. And we know that the safety factor was associated with that was documented in many peer-reviewed published articles that justified their entry into the marketplace. In October of 2024, when we entered into the AK entered into an agreement with the Holistic Alternative Recovery Trust, HART, in order to force those 7-OH manufacturers to not call it kratom any longer and to have them acknowledge that in fact they had the reasonable basis for safety. Those conditions were violated, both of them, and most importantly, the market entry criteria along the way. We know that there is not a single peer-reviewed published article about 7-OH that was on the marketplace before market entry and hasn't been one since that would justify or give any manufacturer this reasonable basis for safety. I know that you're hearing loudly in the marketplace, oh, well, even Dr. Henningfield reported that 7-OH was not schedulable. Dr. Henningfield did that in an eight-factor analysis produced for the DEA in 2018, 16 first, and then replicated in 18 and then updated in 2021. All of those documents reference the naturally occurring levels of the metabolite 7-OH that occurs only after the drying process, the oxidization by heat, by the sunlight and the drying of the plants. It had nothing to do with a flipped product where the majority of the compound was in fact 7-OH. It never addressed that issue, and it is unfair, and in fact, it is a fraud for the 7-OH people to make that claim that Dr. Henningfield did any such thing as justifying 7-OH. They stretch it beyond comprehension when they cite various testimonies and documents that I've provided at various state legislative levels, and there's circulating one on the internet now that I circulated in Rhode Island, where we successfully had the legislature agree to remove the ban and to replace it with the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And I had a document that said that 7-OH was not schedulable along with kratom in its naturally occurring form. It has nothing to do with a chemically manipulated, highly concentrated 7-OH product that at the end of the day has only trace amounts of mitragynine in it. That's different, vastly different from any product that is on the marketplace that can be properly classified as a pure leaf kratom product. I know it's disappointing to that crowd. And I know that there are people that say that they have been greatly benefited from access to and the use of 7-OH products. We understand that. And when you look at the utilization patterns and some of the evidence that's been provided, it cites specifically the therapeutic benefits that people have with using 7-OH. One of the most persuasive arguments that we made to Dr. Jawa's staff is that the consumer population of raw leaf kratom products and properly extracted products really broke down into three categories. One was a person who wanted to simply replace a cup of coffee with a kratom product. You don't see that with a 7-OH product. It's simply not possible because it's highly concentrated, chemically manipulated, and you're not talking about the natural occurring levels of 7-OH in a kratom product, a pure leaf product, because there is only trace amounts of 7-OH. It is no greater than, in our KCPA bills across the country, 18 of which have passed, document that you cannot have more than 2% of the overall fraction of the plant in a product. And yet they have 7-OH products that, again, are highly concentrated and that they have a high concentration of 7-OH. So you're not going to find a person who simply wants the energy boost and increased focus that you would have with a cup of coffee replacement with a kratom product. The second third, and by the way, Dr. Oliver Grunman's consumer survey broke these into roughly one third each. The second third of the kratom consumer population are those people that are seeking a little mood boost, reduction of anxiety, and the minimizing feelings of depression. Again, 7-OH might help there, but it's like taking a shotgun when you just need a BB gun, and that's really bad. And then the third category are people that use kratom for acute and chronic pain. Those people do not expect to get the same relief that you would achieve from using an opioid. What they seek is to be able to manage their acute and chronic pain rather than use the opioids for all of the downsides. And that's where Dr. Joie talked about how important it was to allow access for that group of people in order to keep them off of a highly addictive substance. And therein lies the critical issue, because there are people in that third subset category that were using kratom to help them wean off of opioids because they didn't like the side effects of them, didn't like exposing themselves to the risk of an overdose, and they certainly wanted to find a safer pathway in order to manage their acute and chronic pain. 7-OH is, and this has now become a subject of some discussion because of some language that I have used in testimony saying that kratom is a full agonist, and the critics are claiming that that's an overstatement. I acknowledge that it is. But what is not an overstatement is that the binding affinity of 7-OH to the mu opioid receptors is vastly and significantly greater than for mitragynine. And that's a fact, scientific fact, and they cannot escape that. So they can't hide behind some sort of semantic twist that simply suggests that because it's not a full agonist, that therefore it's safe because of the binding affinity, which creates the kind of addiction liability, the very standard under the Controlled Substances Act, and the basis for the federal government, both in the form of HHS and FDA, to recommend the scheduling of 7-OH because of its binding affinity and the resulting addiction liability that comes with it. Many want to say that, well, we haven't had any deaths from 7-OH. That is yet to be determined because we know that in the postmortem examinations by medical examiners and coroners and by experts who've examined this, they say that 7-OH is very unstable and therefore unlikely to be detectable in a postmortem tox screen, even though it may in fact be the cause of death. And the resulting problem is that where there are trace amounts of mitragynine in the bloodstream of the deceased, that it could easily be mistaken by a medical examiner or coroner as being a kratom death when in fact it was not. It was actually a 7-OH death. Now, what the science will determine on that is something we need to wait for, we need to carefully examine, and the truth will be told when those studies are conducted. We're willing to wait for those studies to be completed, but we're not willing to wait for an untested, unverified substance that has this significant addiction liability to become the predominant product in the kratom marketplace, deceiving and defrauding consumers that thinking it's a kratom product. Now, I have heard the litany of arguments that have been made by the 7-OH people in their attempts to convince the governor of Ohio and the Board of Pharmacy that, in fact, the kratom is the culprit, not 7-OH, that 7-OH is some sort of a godsend that's really helping people. I am not suggesting that 7-OH doesn't help some people. The question is the risk analysis that needs to be done and the criteria for scheduling. There is nothing in the 8 factors that suggests that there's a sole criteria that you ban a substance because it kills people. In fact, the predominant criteria in 7 of the 8 factors is whether or not there is a substantial addiction liability that leads to a destruction of the quality of life of individuals who are consuming it. And I can tell you that when I walked the show at Champs, a trade show, business to business trade show, where there were more than 100 7-OH vendors to a man. When I asked the agents manning those booths, what is the difference between kratom and 7-OH? And always they told me, oh, much more powerful, much more euphoric experience. Kratom, 7-OH rather, will knock you on your ass. That is hardly the endorsement that you want. And I know that people will say, well, that was just a misinformed agent at the booth. But when you see dozens and dozens of those agents saying the same thing to buyers It is a business to business show where buyers come in to buy these products so that they can distribute them across the country. That's the message they're getting. It is a more powerful product by many magnitudes than Kratom itself. I get it. I understand it. But when the 7-OH people get up and say, well, this is just a turf battle, the Kratom community is upset because the 7-OH has stolen the market share. And now all the American Kratom Association is doing is trying to defend in some new way the Kratom manufacturers. Well, that's misplaced. First off, and this is an important distinction, in 2019, when Utah was the first state to pass the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, 2019, trust me if I'm wrong, is 4 years before any 7-OH product entered the marketplace. And in that bill, it says that you can have no greater than 2% of the overall fraction of the kratom plant in a kratom product. Now, that was put in there because we recognized that the naturally occurring levels of 7-OH would never exceed that 2%. If you convert that today, that would mean that you cannot have a per serving of a product greater than 1 milligram of 7-OH. 1 milligram. Now, think about that. How many products have you seen marketed by 7-OH manufacturers that are 1 milligram? In fact, the Vince Sanders, who heads up the Heart Group, testified in Rhode Island that the serving size that they had documented for that was safe was 28 milligrams. Well, they have no such evidence of that. He said it. I have not seen the data to support it yet. He then subsequently testified in Massachusetts that you could consume 2 pounds of 7-OH in a single setting and it wouldn't kill you. Well, that's not the standard, whether it kills you or not, but is it safe? And this, of course, is the most critical problem that we have. I know, in addition, the 7-OH people are touting the fact that their product is fine. People are just loving it, and along the way, you need to look at the data that was provided by the FDA examining that very issue, and you will find that it is persuasive enough to justify the scheduling recommendation as an emergency scheduling to allow for a couple of years to transpire when the evidence can be gathered fully to justify permanent scheduling. And that's just the bottom line. But we know that this is about business. It is, in fact, in part what the 7-OH people are saying. It's about the market. And when a Columbus, Ohio television station reporter asked the Seven Hope Alliance representative that did she think it was appropriate to be selling these products to kids? In other words, the packaging and the materials are attractive to children. And her answer was, absolutely, we shouldn't do that, and we don't. And yet, on the screen were the Smurfs 7-OH products. On the screen were the ice cream confection 7-OH products. The representative from Hart, in the debate that I had with them at the Champ Show back in June, actually said that they had stopped selling the ice cream confection 7-OH products. I walked away from that debate and went down on the floor, and I found within 20 minutes 4 vendors that were selling the so-called banned, the ones they stopped selling, of those ice cream confection 7-OH products. These are appealing to children. This is about the almighty dollar, but it's on the 7-OH side. And so that's why, as we confront this situation in Ohio, that a couple of things that we need to do. First off, we need to thank Governor DeWine because he's made a courageous decision here to correct, because he had misread and his staff had misread what the news reports and the headlines were saying incorrectly, that the FDA commissioner and Secretary Kennedy were in fact advocating for the ban of all kratom compounds. They were not. They made a distinguishing factor there. We are going to work with the legislature, and we need to have support from the advocacy community to protect the several 100,000 kratom consumers in the state of Ohio from a ban that is simply misplaced because of bad information that has been circulating. And we're going to be back supporting the Board of Pharmacy in actually enacting a ban in the state of Ohio on 7-OH products. We do that because it is the science that documents it. And you can't make up the science. You can't parade it around as though it's valid science by suggesting that the standards have changed for scheduling. It's not about deaths exclusively. It's about addiction liability. It's not about saying, well, there's not sufficient numbers of addiction liability cases or deaths that would justify the scheduling. It is about the assessment of the risks about a substance that is creating a public health crisis in America. And Secretary Kennedy and FDA Commissioner McCary said it right. They said we don't want to be behind the curve this time when we saw the tragic outcome of an opioid epidemic when an overdose epidemic, when you saw that it was just the government was too slow to react. We support these actions and will continue to do so until and if the science is available to justify it. So I'll stop here for 1 second before I move to the next topic and just encourage anyone who has a question, you can put it in the Q&A and we'll get to those in just a minute. In other states where we're working, I know that there is a lot of confusion about what's happening in North Carolina. I can assure you that we're working closely with the legislators there. It looks like because of some confusion with the hemp bill that was there, that we're going to have to wait till next legislative session for the KCPA. But we're using this time period to educate people in the legislature so that they don't confuse these topics. And it was in the North Carolina legislature, in testimony provided by one of the largest 7-OH raw material manufacturers in the country based in North Carolina, where they stood up and said, oh, this is just a turf war. This is just a manufacturers in the kratom industry that don't like the fact that we're stealing market share from them. That is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. But that's what they said. So we've got to educate these legislators to help them understand what is going on. In the state of Florida, you saw that the emergency ban was enacted by the Attorney General. It is one of the few states where the Attorney General has that authority to have that initiative. It is a temporary scheduling until or if the legislature decides to affirm it or to modify it. And so it is in effect today. We personally think that the standard that they adopted of 400 parts per million is simply the wrong standard because it is not expressed accurately in testing that's done on kratom raw materials and finished products. And so we're working with the Attorney General's office now to see if we can get it modified in a way that does not deprive the consumer of a legitimate kratom product that does not present an unreasonable risk to the safety based on its conditions of use or the labeling and serving size. We are going to advocate that we have that 1 milligram per serving, which is the accurate conversion of naturally occurring 7-OH rather than these chemically synthesized 7-OH products. So we'll be in that discussion mode with the Attorney General's office. In the state of Texas, they have called a couple of special sessions now. The representative who was promoting the equivalent of slightly modified Senator Perry's bill has not given it traction or pushed it in the current special session. And so we're looking forward to working with him, his staff, and with other members of the Texas legislature to properly inform them about the distinction between 7-OH products and how natural kratom leaf products, properly extracted products, can be marketed in the state of Texas appropriately without the onerous restrictions that are proposed by Senator Perry and by Representative Owens in their current bill. And so we'll keep everyone posted. But again, we're going to need help in conveying that. It was interesting to see, although not the wording that I would have used, that the Texas Department of Health put out an advisory about 7-OH products. We expect that that's going to happen in many states around the country because the alert has now been out that 7-OH is the culprit here, that there are a lot of serious questions about its safety, including implications of deaths that need to be closely examined so that the public safety is preserved and protected. Our goal is to protect consumers. We have at the American Kratom Association, I know many of you know this, reported more than 130 companies, kratom manufacturers, who have used illegal marketing tactics in order to induce a kratom consumer to purchase a kratom product because they market it in a way that's illegal under federal law. We do not discriminate against those people. Anybody that violates the law, we report them. Now, I know that there are some in the 7-OH community that are making a big deal that we have in our GMP program companies that they believe has somehow violated at some point in the past some of the standards that we put into place. First off, the GMP program is not a product-specific program. It is about the equipment and the procedures that are used by kratom manufacturers to make sure that they do it according to FDA standard good manufacturing practices. there are very specific requirements. They require equipment, they require protocols for cleaning that equipment, they require testing requirements in finished products and on the raw materials that are involved. And that's what that program is designed to do. It is a mistake for anyone to think that we endorse a Kratom product just because it meets a GMP program, because we don't know what the formulation is. The AK has not endorsed any specific Kratom product because we don't evaluate what the product formulation is, but rather rely upon the federal statute that says that you cannot enter the market without a reasonable basis for safety under the conditions of use. And that means good science. And that means, while not exclusive, that you have to have some peer-reviewed published literature, or you have to have internal safety data that actually documents in a persuasive way to a regulator that you have sufficient basis for market entry. And then the evaluation is done about all of the adverse events that get reported. Just recently, the Poison Control Centers have added another category for 7-OH. They only did that a couple of months ago because they saw the emerging need for a distinction to be made between them. And so we'll watch that data carefully as we go forward. In the state of California, we are working closely with the California legislature and trying to work with the Department of Health. We know that California and a number of other states, it's true in Ohio, in Michigan, in New Mexico, in North Dakota, in Las Vegas, in other parts of Nevada, and we're seeing it happen in Illinois and some other states where there are product seizures being made by the health departments or the departments of agriculture. And we need to, of course, educate them on what the distinction is between a safely formulated, based on the science that's available for that required federal standard are met, and that between those products and 7-OH. So we're working hard to do that. We will continue to do it. These are sometimes long haul projects. We would like to have them passed sooner than later. We have a record of 18 states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, all of which document the ability of a state to regulate kratom appropriately and to distinguish between kratom and 7-hydroxymitragynine products. So that's the situation that we're in right now. And I'm going to go to the Q&As right now. Again, if you have a question, you can simply put it up. I'm going to run through them, and I'll answer as many as are there in order to make sure that we have a robust discussion. Adam asked, has there been any confirmation that HHS and FDA received the letter from the AKA? The American Kratom Association sent a letter to Commissioner McCary and copied to Secretary Kennedy. There was in two parts. One, the letter was simply to ask Commissioner McCary for him to correct, under the authority of the executive order issued by President Trump in June of 2025, this year, where President Trump ordered each federal agency, including the FDA, to align itself in their scientific practices to gold standard science. We know, and I pointed out in the letter to Commissioner McCary and in an attached report, that the scientific conclusions that are reached by the FDA are not documented with gold standard science. So we know that those letters have been received by both Commissioner McCary and by Secretary Kennedy, and we're looking forward to having discussions with those agencies in order to improve and align with the required gold standard science. And just as an example, if you look at the FDA and Kratom webpage, it is riddled with conclusions that do not meet the standard under the executive order for gold standard science. They simply are making guesses or assumptions or repeating outdated information, none of which ought to be the basis for a document that is being used across the country, literally to seize products. In the state of California, the agent that seized some products in Northern California handed to the retailer a Xerox copy of the FDA and Kratom webpage. So we're looking forward to working on this very hard. Lloyd says that his sister reports that Washington was about killing kratom, or is it synthetic kratom? In fact, the recommendation for scheduling by the Washington Department of Board of Pharmacy was a petition raised by a Virginia pharmacist who also tried to get the Virginia Board of Pharmacy to ban kratom. Both of those were summarily rejected because of the lack of science and the information that was required in order to meet those standards. We are encouraging every board of pharmacy in the country that has the authority to do so to take action against 7-OH products while the federal government works through its ban procedure, whether as a permanent scheduling recommendation or an emergency scheduling. We think that is important. James asked if there's any update on the Illinois KCPA. It sounds like the veto session has slammed other issues. Uh, the, the, the actual work on the Illinois KCPA will be delayed until next year, but we have built significant momentum. We have agreement with the major associations that work in this area that we are going to pull together instead of working at counter purposes. And so I think that that's going to be great news in not only in Illinois, but many states where we get an agreed upon KCPA model legislation that we promote without fighting each other along the way. Misty asked, will banning 7-OH cause whole leaf to be banned? Uh, it's a fair question, and that would only happen. The only way it'll happen is if there is science that would back it up. Because to the extent that we were able to secure support from Congress, it was based on the scientific evidence that existed at the time. Since 2016 and 2018, there have been over 100 new peer-reviewed uh, published articles that document the safety profile of kratom to adhere to the standards under the Controlled Substances Act. So there's no way that the request for scheduling of 7-OH, which has very little, if any, science to back up its safety profile, which has documented instances of adverse events that meet the standard for emergency and permanent scheduling. So that's something that will be worked out. But I can assure you that there is nothing that is on the radar for either the FDA or HHS to recommend scheduling of whole leaf natural kratom products. Not going to happen under the watch of the current administration, and it's because there isn't sufficient science to do so. You heard Commissioner McCary say we are not going after the whole leaf product, and that's the bottom line. And let me clarify something again, if I can. In the definition of what a whole leaf product is, it includes both whole leaf products that are formulated in various ways. I mean, you can have the powder, you can have capsules, you can have tinctures. Those are part of the product formulations that are designed to make them more palatable to consumers, but they do not impact the safety profile of those products. And that is why when we talk about the pure leaf kratom products, we also include properly extracted products where mitragynine is the predominant alkaloid extracted at a potency level that is limited because of the extraction methodologies using FDA approved food grade solvents. And that's an important distinction. I know there are some people who are crusaders for the whole leaf products and they would like to ban extracts. But and I agree, for highly concentrated, improperly extracted extract products, that should happen, no question, but not for those that use traditional FDA approved food grade solvents in order to achieve a cleaning of the product and a more standardized dose of the product along the way. Jordan says, and I'm going to acknowledge that I know that there are people who are pro 7-OH people, and I have offered and actually had a Zoom call with them twice now. One didn't go so well, where there's a lot of interaction where people are just not going to listen to me because they disagree, and that's their right. I have no problem with that. Being disrespectful is a problem to me, so I apologize in advance if we get into that. But anyway, Jordan makes a comment. He said, not really a question, but rebuttal to the argument by 7-OH proponents that we're risking kratom raw leaf being banned by supporting a 7-OH ban. One thing that some of these proponents apparently don't realize, they're fighting against the prohibition mindset that is old as the alcohol prohibition. That's a good comment. In principle, I agree with them that prohibition does not help society in the end. However, we are not going to win the prohibition fight with the kratom issue alone. There's no way kratom stays legal with the kind of S7OH products that are on the market right now. Absolutely true, by the way. The fight against prohibitionist mentality is much larger than kratom or 7-OH. Keeping kratom legal is not the issue on which we should try to fight against prohibition. Too much writing is already on the wall. Thank you very much for that comment. I agree with you. I think that these are complex public policy issues. The complexity drives the need for conclusions that are based on reliably on science, and that's where we have to fight. Chelsea says, does the ban in Florida mean that basically all kratom products are banned? It does not. It only says that where 7-OH is present in the product at greater than 400 parts per million, that product is banned. We think that is a little bit too restrictive, and that's why we're working with the AG's office right now. But we absolutely believe that there should be a restriction on 7-OH products where the predominant the metabolite in the kratom product is 7-OH, because obviously that's not pure kratom and not even close to it. So uh, there's that. Melody says we almost missed North Chicago ban threat, HHS win, but in short term will get harder. Please remind them to check their local government agendas and minutes. Melody, thank you. We have a service that provides us with some information and occasionally picks up some of these local bans, but the information dissemination is often difficult, hard to scrape for these programs that we subscribe to. So everyone that sees in their local community with as much advance notice as you can give us, it helps us to do it. We've had some real successes at the local level, but we need to have as much advance notice. And thank you to all of the advocates out there, Melody and the host of other people that Misty and her group are fighting for us and alerting to us are absolutely terrific. Um, Stephen asks, is there any chance that California will Assembly will regulate kratom this session? No, they've only got a couple weeks left. The holdup has been on the KCPA moving forward that's sponsored by Assemblywoman Bain solely on the basis of 7-OH. This is and that hold or suspension of that bill was created prior to the action by the FDA and HHS on recommending a ban on 7-OH. So now that that has been given some clarity, I think there's going to be an informational hearing that will be held where probably sometime here in September, October, but I don't believe that there will be any action on kratom. There might be on 7-OH, but even that's highly unlikely. Um, Bobby asked me to comment on a plan for Louisiana. It was a significant disappointment for Louisiana to join those states that have banned kratom. And more importantly, and terribly disheartening, was the fact that you had sponsors who are really strong legislators, who really have, I think, in their hearts, they wanting to protect consumers, but they were misled. And for example, Representative Hilo actually stood on the floor of the Louisiana House and was asked by one of her colleagues, what is the difference between pure kratom and these synthetics? And the representative at the podium, while arguing for the ban bill, said, there is no such thing as a synthetic. And the lobbyist who told you that, meaning me, that there was a difference, you should tell that lobbyist that I was born at night, but not last night. And then she went on to strongly discredit the concept that there was, in fact, a synthetic kratom product. We know, of course, that's true. So we're hopeful that because of the information that was incorrect, that was relied upon to pass this bill, combined with the fact that there are now hundreds of thousands of Louisiana residents who are criminalized if they have access to kratom that is now banned there, and the fact that the HHS and FDA recommendation has clearly identified the distinction between natural kratom and a synthetic, that the governor would consider imposing an executive order that would suspend the enforcement of that bill until the legislature can address this in the next session in January. So I think that would be very helpful for us, and we're going to pursue that pathway, and we're going to need some help when we get there. We're working with some legislators now who openly acknowledge that they were given incorrect information, however well intentioned it was, and how we can simply work on those things. So, Bobby, thank you. We're going to continue to fight there in Louisiana because that was certainly a law that was passed based wholly on inaccurate information, which now has been clarified on the national stage by the FDA commissioner and the secretary of HHS. And I think that the governor of Louisiana would be well grounded in taking action here to help us along the way. Chase asks, what do you suggest to everyone that has become dependent slash addicted to 7-OH? Go on Suboxone, methadone. It's viewed as a very safe harm reduction strategy for many people thus far. Are these people going to be hung out to dry? Chase, I understand it. I'm not a medical professional. I can tell you that anyone who has become dependent or addicted to 7-OH, and it gets banned, which it should be, must find an alternative, and that might require some help from a responsible medical provider. I'm not a believer personally in substituting with Suboxone or methadone. It may be in some cases that's the appropriate course of action, but it's going to require for some people with 7-OH because of the binding affinity, which is by multiples, many times stronger than mitragynine, then they're going to need some help. And so that's what I do. And I know it's frustrating, but the real blame lies on the marketing techniques of an industry that simply got ahead of itself without having the requisite science. And I believe that many of those manufacturers might not have gotten into this business if they had understood that the safety data simply was not there. There are some people, there are some people that are in this solely for the money. And they're the ones who are chirping the loudest today saying, oh, the AKA is just trying to protect the kratom industry. No, we're trying to protect consumers. And we've demonstrated that. And I've already illustrated how we started this battle in 2019. And so our credentials are there. They're impeccable. And for the suggestion to be made that we're trying to defend some segment of the industry is nonsense. And you can ask the many people in the kratom industry that are not following good GMP guidelines. They roundly criticize me and say, you're trying to put me out of business. And I tell them, no, I want you out of business if you're not willing to comply with good GMP, which protects consumers. So I don't take the Seven Hope Alliance nonsense lightly here because all they're doing is trying to divert attention away from the fact of their failure to actually meet the standards required by federal law for market entry. Misty asked, any update on Connecticut? So the Connecticut legislature, in the last couple of days of their session, snuck in a ban on kratom with the direction that the Office of Consumer Protection would publish a rule and they would use that process, which is statutorily defined in the state of Connecticut. We have contacted the governor's office and the Office of Consumer Protection, and there will be a rule pursuant to the law that will be published shortly. It will be approved by the governor, and that will trigger a process which will include, if we're able to muster 15 Connecticut consumers that ask for a public hearing, they will schedule that. There will be public testimony provided, and that would then allow for the review of that recommendation to extend into the next legislative session. And we're going to be able to share with the legislators who were misled or not aware of this drastic action that was taken at the last minutes in the late night. And hopefully we'll be able to correct that problem. Um, Melody asks, since the 7-OH information has come to light, is there any chance that states that ban purely kratom would be convinced to reverse their bans? Of course, that's possible. That's why we have to be vigilant in our efforts. I understand the concern and it's legitimate, but we will fight hard. It is the consequence of good public policy getting immersed in some of the arguments that the 7-OH people will make. And they're going to be loud. They've got a lot of money behind them. And they're going to try their best to divert attention away from the reality of what the science says. And so we're going to be out there fighting hard. We'll need your help in order to do it. And we're going to continue to work on that. Crystal asked, how do we here in Toledo get them to pass Kratom Consumer Protection Act instead of banning it all? They are financially driven only by rehab centers opposed to it. What can I do besides be there again? Well, Crystal, be there again. Your voice is important. You've made an excellent point that the tin cup rattlers in the substance abuse community that don't like kratom are using the pretext that they're seeing all these clients roll through their doors with this intense addiction. Well, guess what? That's not pure kratom. And now that the distinction has been drawn at the federal level, I think it'll help to understand and, more importantly, to persuade local lawmakers and policymakers that they need to look at this more carefully than just the knee-jerk reaction by a substance abuse center, which has a financial interest in trying to get rid of kratom. I think we can persuade them to do a KCPA at the local level, and we've seen that happen. Or to, more importantly, ban the synthetic products and then let the state KCPAs take over. Misty asked, when is the federal KCPA? We're in intense discussions with the FDA. They're actually cooperating with us now about recommendations they are making. So we're a little delayed in refiling the federal KCPA, but for good reasons. And I think that we're able to get into reasonable discussions about how we can properly, in an acceptable way, actually protect the Kratom marketplace and define what the bad products are. So we're really excited about that. And so it's just an ongoing battle. But you'll see a federal KCPA soon. We are planning on a congressional briefing at the end of September, on September 30th, and you can look forward to more information on that as it comes out. Michael, I'm sorry, Jeff says uh, doesn't have a question. He just wants to say thanks for the AKA. Well, we appreciate your support. Couldn't do it without you. Would not do it without you. And so thank you, Jeff, for your support and your kind words. Michael points out that Illinois villages have continued proposing these sales bans based on the concern of unregulated hemp and kratom products theme. Any update on the future on Illinois KCPA legislation? We have just reached an agreement, I think I referenced it a little earlier, with the major associations that are involved in this fight at the state level. Most of it has been about some uh, unnecessary conflicts. And so we're working together now, the Global Kratom Coalition and the Botanics for Better Health and Wellness, to craft a bill that will be supported by all three organizations, and we will align by and fight together in order to get it passed. So I think that bodes well for Illinois in the next legislative session along the way. Jan asked, any updates on Massachusetts? Look like something is happening on September 10th. There will be a joint committee on public health that will review the Kratom bills, both the ban bill and our KCPA. We are working with the Massachusetts legislature to amend the bill in order to be more acceptable to them. We're open to those discussions. We're working with the Global Kratom Coalition and Botanics for Better Health and Wellness there as well. And so I think we'll have a good outcome along the way. But this is just another step, another hearing. It's already cleared the Judiciary Committee informational hearing. This is another one that we've done. So, Jan, if you're there, we welcome you to come and support us along the way. But that will be more of an informational hearing than a movement one. We are clearly going to be working as best we can with those that are proposing a ban to help them understand the distinction between the dangerous 7-OH products and pure kratom along the way. Crystal asks, is there any time frame in Ohio for making a recommendation to accept the KCPA? You absolutely should continue to contact the pharmacy board and the governor's office, thanking the governor's office, encouraging the pharmacy board. Now, they're going to react to what the governor instructs them to do, but the legislature is going to be the key. And we're now in a position where I think once we get the final bill language agreed to, that we can move forward with the passage of the KCPA, hopefully this year, and be the number 19 state to do so. Nicholas from Wisconsin says, Nick says, I just stepped in the meeting. Do you have any updates about Wisconsin changing things here at all? This has been incredibly difficult, and we're in the process now of trying to negotiate with the Controlled Substances Board. I can't say much more about that, but we're working hard to see if we can get everybody to come together in an agreement. And so, fingers crossed, stay tuned. Just a complex discussion that's going on right now. And I'm sorry I can't be more explicit about it, but it's kind of a difficult situation. Um, Bobby asked if I know what the date when the FDA will open up public comment. First off, it's not the FDA. It will be the Drug Enforcement Administration. And if they recommend temporary scheduling, as they did for Kratom in 2016, the rule is that it is a 30-day period without any public comment period and no judicial review. And 30 days after the publication in the Federal Register, it becomes law for a 2-year period, possible to be extended by another year by the Attorney General. We expect that that's what's going to happen. We expect that the 7-OH community will try the same thing that we did in 2016, which is to recruit legislators. But we had the truth on our side when we did that. We had years, decades of experience in the United States, and we had centuries of experience of the safe use of kratom internationally. What the 7-OH people don't have is any documentation of safe use of a highly concentrated 7-OH product, with the majority of their product being 7-OH, the vast majority having any kind of safety data behind it. So I don't think that they'll be successful in that effort. I expect that they will have a tough fight over that 2-year period to try to justify the safety profile of 7-OH to avoid a permanent scheduling. We'll see how that plays out. But there will be even though it's not authorized, lots of comments flying back and forth, and we'll be alert to that and encouraging our people to weigh in as well. Um, Camila says clarification on North Carolina, so it will not be banned at this time. It will not be. Thought I heard it went back to committee in the House where the hemp bill would probably die. This is one of a couple of states where hemp and kratom get intermeshed with one another. It becomes very difficult. What we're trying to do now, in part, is play defense to make sure that kratom doesn't get stuck into a hemp bill that suddenly gets traction to passage with bad language in it. And so that's what we're working on right now. And we've had assurances from all the influencers in the North Carolina legislature that they're not going to let that happen. And we'll get a good bill eventually out of them, probably next year. Um, let's see. Carl asked how much support of, I think it's Elliott, is that Louisiana? I'm not sure. Do the anti-kratom supporters have, and how can we educate local uh, I assume you mean, unless I'm misreading this, and I apologize if I am. We're working hard with Bobby and other influencers down there in Louisiana, if that's what you're referring to get this thing done. And so we're working hard on that. It's going to be an extraordinary effort for the governor to suspend the enforcement of a piece of legislation, but we think the justification is there, as I've articulated earlier. Oh, LE means law enforcement. I'm sorry. So law enforcement is problematic for us. And I can tell you that we have tried for the past 5 years to convince various law enforcement groups to talk to us. We have really powerful law enforcement influencers who are agents on the street in drug enforcement, and they're saying you're getting it wrong. And yet there's this bias that is embedded within the law enforcement community that says the kratom is bad, and I think that's influenced a lot by the drug courts, and it's a constant education opportunity for us, and we're going to continue to work on it. Most of it is grounded in their belief that the kratom is somehow attractive to children. That's why we're so hell bent to make sure that we don't allow kratom products that are attractive to children. And frankly, the evidence isn't there that their position is even justified, but it's one thing we have to fight. So, Carl, thanks for clarifying that. We just give an example. We ask for an op-ed piece to counter an anti-kratom piece in the Chiefs of Police magazine that's distributed nationally. They refused. We asked to have a panel discussion that would have required a payment from us to participate at their annual convention last year in Boston. They refused. They're just not interested in finding out the truth. And so what we have to do is use legislators to try to force them to the table. The great news is that the California Narcotics Officers Association is wholly supportive of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So that's a breakthrough, and we're going to continue to shop that around the country to show that there really is an informed support for appropriate regulations on Kratom rather than these bans. Um, and Carl asked, can I hook you up with the Texas Sheriff's Association? Man, you could. I listened to the testimony they provided in the hearing a couple of weeks ago, and it was appalling. So I would love to have that connection. So, Carl, please reach out to me and let's do that. It's mhad on americankratom.org, and I would welcome that connection. So that concludes the questions that we have. If you have additional questions, certainly send them to us. We're trying to keep as on top of these issues as possible. We're a lean and mean organization. We appreciate everyone who donates to us because it helps us stay in the game here, and that's really important given all the things that are happening. We have a well-financed, committed 7OH crowd that's working against us. The thing that they don't have on their side is the truth when it comes to a proper evaluation of what the safety profile of 7OH products are. And we think that that's going to win the day. A little bit of David versus Goliath kind of thing. But we're going to continue fighting, and with your help, we'll be successful in this. And I've said it many times before. I'm going to repeat it. The the American Kratom Association represents consumers and the consumers that are supportive of the AKA's effort. And I'm not saying we're perfect, and I know there are plenty of critics that I have personally. There are many people that feel like that they weren't honored or respected. I'm sorry for that. It was not intentional in any way. I know that there are people that remain today, just convinced that we're somehow in the pocket of the industry and all of that. I think our track record speaks for itself. I hope it does. But we're open to constructive criticism. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm willing to meet with these people. I've made an offer, and one of the most harsh critics on Facebook, I think it's called Kratom Unification Effort. And I've said I had one meeting with them, and then I got criticized because I had it at a time that some people couldn't attend. So I've offered to do a second one, asked them to give me some dates. Haven't received them yet, but I'm open to this. I want there to be an open discussion because I think that from that comes a consensus that really can help us. So uh, I just say thank you, and it's sincere that everyone who's been involved in this battle with us, we're enormously grateful. We wouldn't have access to Kratom products in the United States but for the advocacy community that stood up and fought. And that was true not only in 2016 and 18, it was true when the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs tried to ban kratom at the behest of the FDA, and it took 80,000 kratom consumers to stand up and fight. And that's because your voices were heard, that it made a substantial and real and magnificent difference. I should tell you that I just got contacted by the UN Commission on Narcotics staff, and they want to have a discussion about 7-OH. So I think that this educational effort is paying off as we go forward. We will continue to keep everyone updated. There's some fast-moving things that are happening in some of these states. I'll be testifying in Massachusetts. We're working. I'm meeting with the AG's office here soon in Florida. We've got meetings with Texas legislators. We've got some exciting things happening in California and in other states. So we've got a lot of work to do. And so I think that it's important. And I missed Cody's question about these health departments in Michigan, Albuquerque, and Ohio. Um, we are directly involved in multiple meetings with all of those local jurisdictions where they're seizing kratom products. We have one of the leading FDA attorneys that was actually the deputy director of the Office of Dietary Supplements who's interacting with them. We've been exchanging letters back and forth and challenging the basis upon which these decisions are being made, and we're making progress. It's an incremental process. Some of these people that populate the policy decisions seats in these local health departments are very difficult because they believe and they're locked and loaded on this. So I think that this is something that is really critically important as we go forward and we're continue working. I'm going to ask one last question from George. Have tariffs impacted vendors' ability to import kratom? I don't know. I know that the add-on tax that was added or tariff that was added by the Indonesian government as a part of their implementation of their new regulations obviously increased the prices. It was designed in some way to try to help the farmers. I don't think that relief has gotten to the farmers. It's really the middlemen that have benefited so far. But that yet remains to be seen. Change sometimes takes time. But the Trump administered tariffs that are being negotiated with the Indonesian government, and that's, of course, a flexible thing from one day to the next, will impact the cost of goods coming into the United States. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out. But we, of course, advocate for fairness to the farmers and a regulatory scheme that delivers safe products without it being a corrupt product process along the way. And it's what, the idea that it would enrich politicians on either side of the pond is something that's a big concern to us. So we're going to continue to work on this and stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the advocacy community to do our best. And I sincerely express my apologies to those that might have been offended or even today are offended with our position on 7-OH, but it's science driven and we're going to continue to be respectful of the differences and continue to fight on. So thanks everyone for joining us. Look forward to working with you, and everything that we're able to accomplish is really because you supported us and worked with us throughout these last 10 years. So thank you so much.